The complaints of Kuwaiti Islamists reflect the reality that men in the Gulf are increasingly only qualified for jobs in family businesses and the military. Furthermore, women are a natural ally for Gulf leaders who, since September 11, 2001, have sought to modify their region's austere image to the outside world in order to win greater foreign investment and to combat extremist groups, many of which articulate their grievances in patriarchal terms. In the long run, extending the rights to vote to women, permitting them to drive or even to serve as judges, issues that make headlines today, will look minor in comparisons to the issues facing the Gulf states when these women emerge as the only segment of the indigenous population qualified to work in modern economies. Now, these new social pressures point to two larger aspects of my argument. First, the emerging power of women in the Gulf is consistent with their position historically in Gulf society. As recently as the 1930s, women traveled freely and were teachers, entrepreneurs, political leaders, religious leaders, and even led men into battle. Second, issues such as the veil and gender-separated schools are not solely women's issues. They represent a social norm in which both men and women are expected to act modestly. Here it's worth noting that the dish dasha and accompanying headgear that you see here cover as much of the body as traditional women's garments do and are just as politically and culturally significant. The example of Bahrain is instructive. Starting in the 1950s, Bahrainis of all ages began to wear Western clothing and, as an American noted at the time, left the Arab gown, by which he meant this here, for foreign clothing. But when Bahrain joined the Gulf Cooperation Council in 1981, Bahraini men switched back, adopting the thobes worn not only by their fathers and grandfathers, but also by the neighboring states of the Gulf Cooperation Council, including Saudi Arabia. It was now important for Bahrainis to look correct and to signal that they joined the community of Gulf Arabs. An equally misunderstood element in Gulf life is the role of non-Sunni Muslims and expatriates in Gulf societies. These individuals are often referred to by scholars in my field as a collective other, whose presence is at best temporary. Many scholars characterize expatriates as indicative of the decadence of Gulf societies and warn of the extreme dangers if they are not replaced by indigenous workers. In reality, the presence of these foreigners is the product of a long tradition in which Americans and other non-Arabs and non-Muslims have gone to the Gulf and have made important contributions to the region. Both before and after the rise of the oil industry in the 1930s, individuals as different as Catholic priests, Protestant missionaries, Greek mariners, European geologists, and Indian and Jewish merchants have played important roles in the region. Missionary doctors served tens of thousands of patients in Saudi Arabia between the 1920s and the early 1950s. Although Gulf peoples have a reputation for religious intolerance, the ruling families have readily integrated non-Muslims into their societies and granted them wide cultural freedom and, over time, direct state protection and even times citizenship. While it's true that Shia Muslims have faced discrimination, they have also benefited from official commercial privileges and the rise of the oil industry to achieve rapid socioeconomic advancement. And again, I want to pause here just to point out this is a McDonald's in Bahrain. And just take a look at the types of people who are here. You'll see people who are wearing the traditional Arab gown, both for men and women. But you also see a host of other people here as well. You'll see people who are potentially Americans, Filipinos, Europeans, all in this picture. And this gives you, I think, an interesting snapshot. And why this is important is that these type of murals exist throughout the world where there are McDonald's restaurants. And the point of these murals is to show the types of people who McDonald's believes, quite rightly, are eating here. I'm not going to show you a picture of not. And in my mind, this gives you an important snapshot of these societies and what I'm talking about today, just how diverse they are. And just as indigenous Sunni Arabs have been affected by the rapid technological and political changes in the Middle East, non-Muslims, many of whom are in this shot, and Shia have too. These individuals can turn not only to international media and non-governmental organizations to promote better labor practices, but also to the Shia government in Iraq, to India, and to other states that send workers to the Gulf. Many expatriates also maintain extensive communal organizations in the Gulf and have representatives that agitate on their behalf in their home country's parliament. The demographic presence of foreigners, as much as 70% of the population in some states, and their socio-political activities have not gone unnoticed by Sunni Arabs, although some fear that these expatriates will lead to the extinction of indigenous Sunni Arab society. Others have sought to incorporate Indian democratic tradition and have allowed foreigners the opportunity to become citizens and even star in their movies. How well indigenous Gulf Arabs and expatriate Arabs reconcile these issues will play an important role in the future of the region, especially given the fact that petroleum prices declined rapidly and a world financial crisis erupted in 2008. Not only did Gulf government revenues collapse, but sovereign wealth funds in the Gulf were eviscerated by declining stock markets. Furthermore, China, the United States, and other nations have sought to stimulate their economies in 2009 and beyond by investing in technologies that will decrease their use of oil, promote reusable energy sources, and reduce carbon emissions. In the long run, these new investments could have a significant impact on the demand for and potentially the price of oil as the reduction of coal use did in the United States and Europe in the 1950s and 1960s. Within this financial environment, Gulf Arabs have an opportunity to reshape their societies and to achieve an economic model more in line with that of Mexico, where petroleum is important, but not the center of daily political life. The key to such transition may be expatriates or foreigners, since they are precisely the type of hardworking and industrious people who are essential to the success of contemporary economies, especially those based on knowledge and other types of industries that the Gulf wishes to promote. If expatriates remain in the Gulf, they could be critical to the transformation of this region and to an economy not based on oil. Ironically, the chief dilemma posed by expatriate workers for Gulf Arabs would not be in the future not how to replace them, but how to keep them from leaving. When the Gulf states achieve this post-petroleum economy, women will be well positioned, as I noted, to take advantage of it, but men increasingly will not be. They again fall further behind their male and female peers. With bleak career prospects and ample time on their hands, many young men and even older ones have gravitated towards antisocial behavior, including truancy, petty crime, graffiti that you can see here, drug use, and religious extremism, and drifting, a form of car racing in which drivers perform complex and highly dangerous maneuvers at high speeds. Drifters throughout the Gulf have their performances posted on YouTube, where they have become celebrities and are said to have their pick of young male sexual partners. Would you like to see a video of this? Yes? Yes. I'll show you what this means. This is one from Saudi Arabia. Figured to be up for it. Hopefully, we can make this work.